pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a zoning board
Good evening. This is a meeting of the Grosseto Township Zoning Board of Appeals. This is for the three zoning variances that we have to address today, so we're going to try to expedite this quickly as possible. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda as presented?
Move approval as presented.
Support? So moved.
Approval of the minutes.
We have the minutes of August the 28th, 2012. Do we have a move to approve the minutes of August the 28th, 2012?
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the minutes of the September, August 12th meeting.
Support?
Right.
Okay. Vote? Aye. Nays? Not hearing none. The agenda is approved. The minutes are approved. Now we have the first appeal that we have is appeal number 12-002. What we'd like to do in this case is have Brian Borden come up and give an overview of the case. So Brian, you want to come up and give us an overview?
Sure. I can just do it from here, Mr. Chair.
Pardon?
That's fine. I don't actually have a formal presentation for this.
So you can just verbally give us
What I wanted to do was, in terms of introducing the case, because this is a little bit different than what we've seen of late. I don't recall the last time we had an appeal case before us. We've been dealing with dimensional variances. So this first item on your agenda is related to an appeal of an administrative decision. The process is a little bit different. The review standards are different than a standard dimensional variance. And so what I'd like to do, just by way of introduction, Mr. Chair, is just read a brief excerpt from your zoning ordinance so that everyone understands the process that we're going through this evening. Section 23.5A of these Township Zoning Ordinance, Zoning Board of Appeals is to review the record and the decision of the administrative body or official and determine whether the record supports the conclusion that was reached in light of the requirements of this ordinance. The ZBA is bound by the same rules, procedures, and standards in this ordinance as the original decision body. The ZBA should uphold the original decision unless the record clearly shows that the original decision body or official was one of the following. Item 1, arbitrary or capricious, or item 2, failed to ensure consistency with ordinance standards, or item 3, made an error such as relying on false or inaccurate information, or 4, constituted an abuse of discretion, or lastly, 5, was based upon erroneous interpretation of the zoning ordinance or zoning law.
Okay, with that, can we have the person that is going to make this review?
Yes, Mr. Chairperson, Timothy, members of the board, Timothy Stoker on behalf of the court, who are the parties appealing the decision of the zoning officer of the township. And if I may approach, I've got copies of evidence or additional information for you to look at as we present it to the public this evening.
I would like to make one comment here. The Zoning Board of Appeals has 7 members, and we have 3 members short. We have 4 members, and in order to pass an appeal, we need 4 votes to pass an appeal. I want to put this in front of you so that we will give you an opportunity to say wait for another time till we get a full board so that, you have an opportunity to have more votes than just the 4?
Let me confer with my client, and I appreciate the chairperson's advising us of that. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairperson, can I speak for a second, please? I represent the property owner in interest.
You can wait till after the presentation unless you think that
It's about the timing issue.
the timing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, come up and state your name and...
Mr. Chair? If I may, just a very quick item. I was just informed by the township manager. He received a message from board member O'Connor. She is in the parking lot and on her way. So I wanted to point that out before we got too far with red.
Okay.
So my comment that we have 4, we now have 5, whether that makes a difference or not to you, that's up to you.
Our position would be, we would prefer a full board.
You would prefer a full board?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, my name is John Gaber. I'm an attorney, and I represent Dr. Salvatore Finazzo, who owns the property at interest here. And the reason I wanted to speak right now is I understand that they would prefer a full board, but looking at the timing of this issue, this was supposed to be on the August agenda. At the last minute, they pulled it from the August agenda. Then it was supposed to be on the September agenda, and it was pulled from the September agenda. Now it's on the October agenda, and to delay it any further prejudices my client because he doesn't have the opportunity to put his foundations in the ground and build his house. So we believe they've had ample time to basically get in front of you because they filed their appeal within 30 days. I think it was toward the end of July, and right now it's the end of October. And they've got additional information that they're going to present to you today, too. And this prejudices my client by this continued delay. And so we would ask the board's indulgence to move forward with this issue this evening. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
If I just may briefly respond, thank you. We did ask for the original adjournment. We had issued a Freedom of Information request to the township, and the documents that are part of the submission this evening were not available before the hearing. And part of this is to get to the truth and to understand what the past history has been in evaluating shoreline setbacks. So we wanted to go through the entire history that we could find from 96 to 2012. We got those. The second reason for the adjournment was it was not noticed on time. So we didn't, we were prepared to go forward, and I received a letter from the former zoning board chair, who's now the township attorney, confirming that we would be on the agenda, and then he sent a follow-up email saying it had not been noticed, and so we would be heard tonight.
Only one member short is absent. We do not have 7 members yet. So we have 1 vacancy and 1 absentee.
That I understand.
But we have, what we do have is we have 5 members here today, so it takes 4 to approve an appeal. So 4 of the members up here have to approve the appeal. I mean, that's the case. I mean, it's a little better than 4. 5 is better than 4, but it's still the case where, I don't know how comfortable, you feel. Now, I have never been party to somebody saying, I want to go ahead, or I don't want to go ahead, and then the other party saying, let's go ahead anyway. So this is something that, my feeling is that, and we've operated with 5. We have operated the Zoning Board of Appeals with 5 members. My feeling is that we should go ahead, but I want to take a brief respite here and talk about that with our board members. So if you give us a minute, we can talk about it.
So what are you going to do?
Can we take a go off air for a minute?
Should we call a recess?
You should do something.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we take a 10-minute recess.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Any opposed? None hearing none. Let's take a 10-minute recess.
Now, I move that we go back in session. We have support?
Support, second?
Vote? Aye.
Aye.
So we are back in session. Okay, what we decided to do with 5 members of the board available to us, we are going to proceed with the hearing.
Okay.
That's our decision.
Okay. And thank you for your consideration of the request. Appreciate it. Before I do proceed, though, I'd like to pass those out. With the permission of the chair. I think this is the original. That's the original, so that should really go. Okay. I'll go that way. Yep, I'll take the rest. If the board's ready, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Again, Timothy Stoker appearing on behalf of the appellants in this matter, Mr. and Mrs. Cornuffel. Present with me this evening is John Hennessy, Hennessy Engineers, who will also be presenting some information. Mr. and Mrs. Cornuffel are here as well. This is a relatively, in one essence, a simple matter. It's an appeal of a determination made by the zoning officer with regard to property located at 19945 Lighthouse Point with regard to the average shoreline setback or the setback of a proposed house to be located at this address. And it's commonly known as the Finazzo property. What we've done is we put together in order a evidentiary submission for you, which we hope we can go through at a decent pace and enable you to understand the factual history and the zoning ordinances that are at issue. The Cornuffel property is immediately adjacent to the Finazzo property to the north and is located at 19217 Park Lane, and I'll refer to that this evening as the Cornuffel property. With regard to the shoreline setback, in this particular instance, on July 11, the zoning officer reviewed a site plan that was submitted by the Finazzos to build a new home on their now undeveloped vacant property. There is no home on the property. It's vacant. It's undeveloped. The determination with regard to the setback of that home from the shoreline was to have been based upon Articles 3, Section 28535B4, Article 8, Section 285 1.35, and Article 4 and Figure 4, which we've included, which requires the zoning officer to look at the adjacent properties to the property which is the subject of the building permit in determining the average shoreline setback and then the setback that's to be applied to the proposed home. That did not occur in this instance. What the zoning officer did was only looked at a few of the homes to the immediate south of the undeveloped vacant Finazzo property. The zoning officer did not look at any neighboring property to the north. So in establishing the average setback, all that was considered was the property to the south. That is contrary to the past applications of this ordinance by the township from 1996 to 2012, and we'll go through those. We uncovered about 33 examples where the zoning officer in the past looked at site plans and said, you have to look at the adjacent properties to the proposed structure. You just can't go to one side. As a consequence of that, the decision by the zoning officer, as your township planner, is identified with the standards that have to be followed. The decision in not applying the past history and complying with the zoning ordinance was arbitrary, was an abuse of discretion, does not ensure consistent application of the zoning ordinance, which is mandated. You must have consistent application of the zoning ordinance, and was based upon an erroneous interpretation of the zoning ordinance. All those are basis, as the representative from LSL has told you, as a basis for reversing the decision of the zoning officer. So the public can see what we're submitting, and you have for you. So you know what's involved here. Okay. The property that is before you is demonstrated in Exhibit 1. The Finazzo property is identified as A, and what we've done on this exhibit is highlight the proposed home as we believe should be set back on the property. The property, and then we've identified 3 properties to the south, which are numbered 4, 5, and 6, and the Cornhuffel property to the north, which is 3, and then 2 other homes at that location. So the example, the exhibit shows you the surrounding properties adjacent to and beyond the proposed Finazzo house, which is identified as A. The white lines that are shown are the boundary lines between the properties. The boundary line between the Finazzo property and the Cornhuffel property actually runs down the thoroughfare canal. So they are adjoining properties to each other, as all the other ones. It is our position that those properties should have been considered in determining the average setback and not just the parcels to the south. That's Exhibit 1. If you then turn to Exhibit 2 in your packet, the purpose of Exhibit 2 is to identify for you the river views that will be retained by the Finazzos if their home is located as proposed by Cornhuffels and as we believe is required by the zoning ordinance. Exhibit number 2, which is up on the screen for you, identifies the 2 adjacent homes and the proposed Finazzo home. And as you can see from that view, that the house as shown there would be set back at the 182 feet, which we say is a combination of the average shoreline setback. That view shows, in fact, that the Finazzo house, as the 2 adjacent homes, will have a preserved waterfront view and will not be diminished. That is further shown if you look at Exhibit 3. Again, Exhibit 3 shows the Finazzo home as we propose to have setback as required by the zoning ordinance, 182 feet plus back from the shoreline, and shows the viewing angle of the home towards the Detroit River as well as the canal to the north, and shows that all the other water views are preserved. In fact, this particular exhibit is divided into 2 photographs. One is a shot from the property showing the viewing angle, and the other one is the overhead shot of the property from, again, the residence, showing that all views would be preserved. Verification of that was also taken with regard to Exhibit 3, which shows the proposed floor plan of the house and the window locations. And again, that was done for the purpose of clarifying and confirming, again, that the layout of the Finazzo property and their house would have those viewing angles as showed on the previous 2 exhibits, 1 and 2 and 3. This would be Exhibit number 4, showing again the floor plan, showing that the Finazzo waterfront views are fully preserved by the setback as required by the ordinance, and as set forth in the submission that we've given to the Township Board. Now, if you would then turn to Exhibit 5. One of the questions that we asked ourselves is, since the ordinance, and we'll show you the figures, shows numerous houses to be considered, how is it that in this case the zoning officer only considered the houses immediately to the south? And what had the Township done in the past in reviewing similar situations? And what we found is identified in Exhibit 5. The first document in Exhibit 5 identifies the addresses of 33 instances from 1996 to 2012, where in each case the zoning officer who set forth, who looked at the site plan, looked at the houses on both sides, and then determined the average setback based upon that. In no instance did the zoning officer only consider a house on one side to the jeopardy of the other house. It makes logical sense as when we go through the ordinance and we understand what the purpose of the shoreline setback is. The documents that follow this all identify those site plans and the houses in relationship to them, and I believe there are 33. Some have more than one page with regard to the site plan. what I'd like to have done is if John Hennessy could emphasize exactly how we gathered this information and show you some analogous situations to what we have.
Good evening. Just to give everyone an overview, we did look at...
Could you have your name and your position and what your relationship to the appellant is?
Sure. My name is John Hennessy. I'm with Hennessy Engineers, and I am the engineer for Mr. Corneffel. I live at 8655 Rucker. Okay.
Thank you.
And what we did in reviewing the historical site plans along the waterways, which Lori was very helpful in organizing for us, is we looked at what had been done historically when a structure is being proposed to be constructed in between two structures. And what we found in every case where that occurrence occurred, that the structure on either side of the proposed structure was taken into consideration, even when it skipped a vacant parcel, and even when there was a wooded vacant lot in between it, when existing views are not present because of that heavy foliage, but they would be present once that foliage came down through there. And I'd just like to run through a couple. And this particular one is 22180 East River, and you can see here where it's a site plan that's proposed, and you can actually see where the approving site plan, which I believe was C. Raines or Mr. Gray, actually writes okay on the side of the two adjacent structures that are through there. Here's an example of one that is 22096 Knudsen, and this is where a proposed structure actually skips a vacant piece of property through there. But they take the next adjacent structure into consideration to establish that particular sight line through there, and that site and the building line is demonstrated through there. Here's another one that is 28195 Elba Drive, where again you've got a vacant property through there, but the township required the location of each adjoining structure to establish the proposed sight line or setback line for the structure. Now the ones that we've shown you have been somewhat similar in setbacks, but even when there was dramatic separation, the township required this. Here's one that you can see there's quite a separation. This is 2662 East River, where the two homes are separated the setback between the two homes is fairly dramatic, and the township required that the setback line be adhered to as the average shoreline. Here's one that is 26281 East River, where here you have a 70-foot horizontal separation over a 50-foot lot. And you can see that the township required that the building be constructed between the average shoreline setback. And the last one I have here tonight is 19517 Park Lane. And this is the Starling House, which everyone knows, I'm sure. And here they took into consideration a house on Lighthouse Court and Park Lane. So here they took an instance where the two adjoining structures are not on the same street, but they are both taken into consideration to establish what would be the average building setback. Had that not been done, it would have dramatically changed the setback. So had he only taken into consideration, if I can see that, the structure to the south, you can imagine what would have happened to the Starling House, and how the Starling House, had it been done because it was not on the same street, that the structure to the north, because it was not on the same street, had it not been considered, you can see that the setback would have been here and would have altered dramatically the average shoreline setback of the community. And then the last one I have, I should know this one, I worked on it, 28108 Swan Island, where I was involved after the house was initiated. It had transfer ownership during construction, and the setback from the neighbors within the defined neighborhood by the LSL report in 2010, actually, that are not on the same street, on Island Drive and Bouchard how they, not only their comments were taken into consideration for the site plan for this particular development, it impacted the site plan of the development and made requirements. Now, those two neighbors were not in the same property, and maybe we want to just show that exhibit.
If you look at Exhibit 7, we have an aerial photograph which shows this particular property.
And here you can see Mr. Shepard's home, or 2818 or 2810 Swan Island, and then we have island or structure number 1, which is 10601 Broadhead Road, and then we have structure number 2, which is 10420 Boucher Road, and their homes were taken into consideration. And the approval letter that was actually developed by LSL regarding that particular development, it states, our office worked closely with the two most involved neighbors to ensure the new plans were consistent with their expectation. A string of emails from April 20th and April 21st indicate their approval as the current plans are consistent with the neighborhood expectation for the project. So clearly these two homes are in the neighborhood of the development, and that's why we feel that Mr. Corneffel is the adjacent neighbor, is in the neighborhood, and has to be taken into consideration.
Is it appropriate to ask a question, Mr. Chair? I have a question for you, though. On that particular case, if you look at the plat, all those three properties are part of the same subdivision.
No, they're not. There's Albenar Colony subdivision and then Swan Island subdivision. They are two separate subdivisions.
On the grading and site development plan, though, it says lots 37, 38, and 39, and part of vacated Swan Island Drive are part of the Swan Island subdivision.
The home is on 3 lots within the same subdivision. But
How many of these 33 instances are they in the same subdivision, and how many are they in different subdivisions? I guess that would be pertinent.
this is in a separate subdivision. My point on this particular exhibit is that these two neighbors, number 1 and 2, they...
My question to you, though, is you're trying to draw comparisons why the zoning official looked up and down the street in 2 directions as opposed to in 1 direction. And the argument in this case is that there are rivers and roads between the properties. I'm asking how many of these properties, though, are they making this consideration because the lots under consideration are part of the same subdivision, whereas in this case the 2 properties are parts of 2 separate subdivisions. Even though their lot line is adjacent in the middle of the canal, they are not part of the same subdivision. I'm asking how many of these examples you have given us are the same out of 2 different subdivisions.
Well, this particular one is in separate subdivisions.
Okay.
This is one case. And then the Starling House is in 2 separate subdivisions as well, because they took into consideration the southernmost property of Lighthouse Point. And Lighthouse Point is a subdivision. It was a piece of property on East River at one point, and which was subdivided. And they took into consideration 2 separate subdivisions on this case.
But you've given us 33 examples? How many
Yes.
of those 33 actually have the same criteria as the case that you're appealing now?
They all do, because the ordinance doesn't speak to subdivision. It shows an example of that. It speaks to how you determine the shoreline setback by looking at the adjacent properties, and we'll talk about that. It doesn't talk about separation by subdivision at all.
It's my understanding that the zoning board decisions in each case is unique, and we don't use those as a criteria for evaluating another appeal.
Well,
So we're not using any of the decisions that you've mentioned in the past.
Now-
We don't use those, and any decisions are unique to the property.
no, this is not a case of a dimensional variance as explained to you by the planner. In fact, the ordinance here, one of the criteria is a requirement that the zoning officer apply the ordinance in a consistent manner. In other words, they don't deviate from the ordinance. So you look at the past history to say, how has the township applied this ordinance in the past? And what you want is a consistent application. If I was here asking for a dimensional variance, you look at, is there a practical difficulty or hardship with the property that I own? That's not the issue before this body. The issue is when the zoning officer reviewed this site plan, did the zoning officer apply the zoning ordinance as written, as consistently applied by the township historically, or did the zoning officer deviate from that? And that's why we went back all these years to say, in each instance, the zoning officer looked at adjacent parcels. In no instance did the zoning officer, whether it was within or without the plat, or whether it was an unplatted lot, a meets and bounds lot, did the zoning officer disregard the adjacent parcel, whether it was separated by waterway or separated by road. Because the issue here is the preservation of the shoreline setback for the water views and the views of all the neighboring properties. And we'll get into the ordinance rationale for that, which we identify. And so what's looked at is the neighboring properties, and certainly in this case, the Cornuffel property, which is the most immediate adjacent property to the north, which shares a common property line with the Finazzo property, is the adjacent property. And can you imagine the inconsistency if you went through and said, well, I'm only going to consider a property to the south in this instance, or a property to the north in the other instance, and leave the other parcels out? You would get a mishmash of decisions, and instead of a consistency. And that's the reason the zoning ordinance doesn't permit that. If we can, I can go through the terms of the zoning ordinance as they relate to this specific situation here. And we included copies of the ordinance within the submittal for you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
In your Exhibit 8, the Exhibit 8 that you you have two properties, two different properties. You have one on Broadhead Road. You got a property A, and then 1 and 2.
Yes.
A, 1 and 2. Now, what house? Excuse me. What house is it that was being built in this case?
A is being built, and there
is being built.
And there was a site plan considered for the pool, and and there was concerns about the watershed views, and the neighbors that lived in number 1 and number 2 were complained to the township identified their concerns about the pool being constructed, and the site plan was modified to address their concerns because it was identified by the planner that they were neighbors within the neighborhood, and that's right from LSL's letter identifying that they're in the neighborhood.
So your point here is to establish the neighborhood fact.
That's right. That's right, because we're the zoning officer stating that because we are the adjacent property, but we're not in the neighborhood. And here, it's been ruled that you can be a street, not on the same street, not in the same subdivision, not even have a view that's defined by the township in this as what's the view behind you, or even the view angles, but you still you're in the neighborhood.
What was the finding of the ZBA in that particular case? They don't always find according to the letter of, I remember that was fairly contentious.
It was fairly contentious, that's right.
The supervisor,
everybody was involved.
Has 2 cents, and there were arguments too that houses that far removed did not have a claim to a waterfront view. But I don't recall how the vote went down on that.
They were given, identified, and if you read the report again, it says our office worked closely with the 2 most involved neighbors to ensure the new plans were consistent with their expectations.
That is what LSL wrote on this paper. How did the ZBA and the
ZBA granted a variance that a fence was not needed within 10 feet around the pool, which is the township ordinance, because it was a peninsula, that he could fence off from each side of his house to the east and the west. And the site plan was, he had elaborate landscaping that had to be eliminated because of the views of those neighbors.
And that was a compromise, I believe, too, because that is something that that homeowner wanted as well.
I think if you were to ask the homeowner, I don't think he would use the word compromise, because he was looking for that landscaping to be put through there, but their views, their watershed views, were taken into consideration. But I think the point is, they were their neighbors that were taken into consideration. Their water views were of concern to them, obviously. We didn't see it that way, but that's the way the township ruled.
But ultimately, it's not what the consultants say, it's not what the neighbors say. It really comes down to the wording and the decision of the motion. Beyond that, none of this is relevant to after that decision.
But the motion was that there could be no landscaping there because watershed views would be impacted. It's almost like you have your vision triangle that you have on average shoreline setbacks, that those water views from these neighbors within the neighborhood had to be considered. And we had never found a precedent like that in the township at all through there, but that's what the township upheld.
So Uda has the point that you presented 33 sites, but without knowledge of the ZBA approval, because there are different approvals that are given for each site, which says that what the board does is look at each site as a unique entity, and we try to make a determination from each site. So that's...
These were not ZBA approvals. These were submissions for site plan approval where...
Well, even with... But they were not part of the ZBA...
No, this is just the normal process where the zoning office...
So these went through the normal process.
You submit a site plan, and that's what should have occurred here. We're saying that the normal process, there should be no guessing, and it shouldn't have to come here, because the ordinance says you calculate the average setback, or the setback based upon the average of the properties that are adjacent to the proposed structure, because the purpose is to preserve the shoreline view. And so if in each instance you're going to calculate it differently, you're going to get a mishmash. One house will then block one other person's view because you have not considered that. And that's why I'd like to go through the rationale that's stated in the ordinance, which gets us to that point. And there's a figure given within the ordinance itself which says you look at a series of houses. You don't just look at one or two. You look at the proposed structure and then those adjacent there too.
But by giving us 33 examples, which are where we can barely even read what is written on them, without the background of each case, they're not good examples for us. You're trying to befuddle us with all these examples. You're trying to show consistency, but your examples appear to be inconsistent. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I don't believe
You
it.
can't make heads or tails of what you're giving us.
I think if it'll be up for the zoning officer or the township to say, no, that's not what we've done in the past. What we did is we submitted a Freedom of Information request saying, please provide site plans to us identifying establishment of the shoreline setback of proposed structures. That's what we were given, okay? And in each instance, you see the adjacent structures and how it was approved. In no instance is there a situation that we're aware of where there was not consideration of the neighboring properties. And when you read the ordinance, it wouldn't make sense to ignore the adjacent property.
I think we understand that. Now, do you want to continue?
I do. All right. If you then look at further as we go through the analysis that we presented to you, if you look at the rationale and the reason for the examination of the adjacent structures that are to the proposed structure, it becomes clear when you look at the zoning ordinance the rationale for that purpose. Article 3 of the zoning ordinance covers single-family residential districts, including the R1A district in which both of these properties exist. Section 28531 sets forth the intended purpose of the zoning regulations with regard to these districts. This is right in the ordinance itself. Quote, the regulations concerning single-family residential districts are considered necessary or appropriate to enhance the quality of life within Grosse Ile's residential neighborhoods. More specifically, the regulations set forth herein are intended to first provide a high-quality residential living environment. Then more specific to this issue, this is paragraph B of that section, protect open areas, shorelines, and other distinctive natural features that contribute to the overall quality of life on Grosse Ile. H, quote, ensure infill development is consistent with the character of established neighborhoods, is compatible with the size, scale, setback of surrounding homes, minimize impacts to view which are significant factors in the township's quality of life. The ordinance directs you to look at the surrounding homes. Then further within the same article, section 28532A, which I quote, single-family districts include standards which recognize the unique characteristics along the shoreline through requirement for larger lots and special measurements of setbacks to preserve views and open space. You can find those sites within Exhibit 8 to our submittal to you. Now, within that situation, they then refer you to Section 283.5B4, which provides in pertinent part, in the case of a lot which fronts both on a road and on a shoreline, the setbacks of any building subsequently erected shall not be less than the greater than the average road and shoreline setbacks. See Figure 4. So if you looked to Exhibit 9, which is identifies that specific situation where they show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 homes located there in the shoreline. They don't just direct us to look at one of them. They ask you to look at the entire area to be examined. The average road and shoreline setbacks. It then refers you to the definition of building line, which is identified, which we've attached as Exhibit 10. Again, if you look at, this is within the definitional section of the ordinance, Figure 4 specifically, shows you again the predominant setback of adjoining structures, and the word adjoining structures is there. It doesn't say it doesn't parse between them. It says adjoining structures. In this instance, there's no doubt that the zoning officer, because he says it on the plan and is acknowledged by LSL in its report to you, says, I didn't consider that. I only considered to the south. This Figure 4, which is directly aimed at the waterfront setback, says setback line of adjoining structures. And that's what's supposed to be considered. And that was not done in this instance. Again, if you look at the same definitional line, building line, a line formed by the face of the building, and by the purposes of this chapter, the building line shall be the same as the front setback line, neighborhood setback line, but no less than required the minimum setback in the zoning district. And again, they refer you to Figure 4, which directly relates to the setback with regard to the shoreline, the adjoining structures. That is what is required by the zoning ordinance itself. Why did that come about? And as we know, with all good planning that exists under any zoning ordinance, a zoning ordinance must be based upon a rational plan under which the zoning ordinance is adopted. In this case, the master plan for this township upon which the ordinance is based and is required to be based provides some specific policy objectives, and we've attached those for you. The first policy objective with regard to the residential areas as it relates to waterfront, and I'm quoting, says, protect views of open space in the waterfront. And then directs that in doing so, and I quote, enforce standards for maintaining open waterfront yards. And then of equal or maybe more importantly, in the same policy objective we found on page 8 of Exhibit 12, which we've attached from the master plan, it says, require consistent setback of residents along the waterfront. So if the zoning officer is allowed to deviate from looking at adjacent structures and say, well, in one instance I do, in one instance I don't, we will not have consistent application of the ordinance, which defeats the objective. Based upon those policies, the master plan then provides, and I quote, waterfront residential. Waterfront residential consists of homes that line the shores of the Detroit River and Trenton Channel. Infill development, and that is the case of the Finazzo home, is an infill house because the lot is vacant and undeveloped, within these areas needs to be consistent with the established historic character and maintain open views of the waterfront. Again, emphasizing needs to be consistent. And then finally, setbacks from waterfront. Because Grosse Ile is a series of islands with numerous waterfront areas, the setback of homes from the shoreline and maintaining open front waterfront views is a critical factor in the overall character of the community. Principal buildings on each lot need to be situated along the predominant waterfront setback to ensure consistent open views along the waterfront are maintained. If you again apply those policy directives, that's what the ordinance then follows through with saying. You look at the adjacent homes. You don't arbitrarily omit a neighboring property to the north or south. You look at those. In the case of the Cornuffel property, as revealed by Exhibit 1, they are the immediate neighbor to the north. They are the neighbor. The fact that they're on a different street doesn't separate them from being a neighbor, because what is common here is the waterfront frontage, and that's the goal here to be protected, the waterfront frontage. That brings the commonality. Just like you would not arbitrarily say we don't consider home number 4 or 5. You look at those, you then make the measurement, and you take the average, and whatever the average is. In this case, it results in a consistent application of the ordinance to do so in a setback of 182 feet. Does that harm Finazzo's in any way? The question is, well, they want to put their house 140 feet, and that's why we submitted Exhibits 2, 3, and 4 to you to identify what they see from the river, from their house, and the viewing angle, both as an overhead, out their windows, and from their property. And their view corridor is specifically maintained, as is the view corridors of the house to the south and the view corridors of the house to the north. For those reasons, we would ask that this body reverse the decision of the zoning officer, apply the ordinance as written, consider the adjacent structures in determining the average shoreline setback, and in this instance, change the setback from 140 feet as set forth in the site plan to 182 point, what is it, I say it, it's inches, 182.48 feet. And I will answer any questions that you might have, and I appreciate your time.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Tim, we've done a lot of work on precedent here, and very good work. We don't probably have enough time to read the whole thing, but you explained it well. Is there anything in all this that you've come across that was done at the same, there was a house on that Finazzo property. Was there anything done in the past as far as shoreline setback previously for that house or anything adjacent to the
I would assume that the house that was built immediately to the south is a new home, correct? And that home, the shoreline setback was applied to that specific home. In this instance, for whatever reason, the Finazzos elected to tear down the home that was there, which then removes that from a protected status, and they now have to comply. Why they chose to do that, I don't know. But once that house is removed from there, the ordinance that's in effect now applies to that. And certainly with the house immediately to the north, or I'm sorry, to the south, that house was based upon the average setbacks in that location. So we're just asking again for uniform consistency.
So the Cornuffel house was built in, what, 1990? Was that the...
That's about right. That's correct. And then
1990, and the, I don't know, that's quite a while ago, but the setback criteria then probably was different than it is today. But it falls in line with the houses to the north.
it falls in line with all the houses. It doesn't.
Not to the south, but to the north.
Well, it doesn't. It falls in line in the essence that it doesn't interfere with any viewing shoreline viewing to the houses to the south as well.
But the calculation of the setback back then did not consider the houses to the south. Is that right? The point that was made earlier in our literature was they could actually move their house forward if it was.
They could have moved their house further forward and chose not to do so. That's correct. We look back from the time we believe the ordinance was adopted, which was, I think, 96. We think that was the approximate time.
A similar argument could be made for the houses to the south, where let's say that there was houses going to be built adjacent to the Finazzo house. This is hypothetical. And if you would determine the setback there, would you take the houses to the north, couple of houses to the north, as part of the average setback?
I would recommend, based upon Figure 4, which shows a series of homes, it doesn't show one or two. It doesn't say take the proposed house and go one or two. It shows a series of homes. It says the adjacent to create consistency. And I think the reason for that is to prevent an anomaly within the existing houses next to each other. If you didn't look at that, you could have an anomaly where one house could then protrude out and block the shoreline view of another.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Skew. You get one house that would skew, or two houses that would skew everything up. And
in fact, if you look at that, they, on both they show not an exact alignment of homes under tab 10, which shows the predominant setback line of adjoining structures. Some were pushed closer to the lake, and they still take the average for establishing the new. So it's not a fixed number for each one. So what they do is they take all those setback numbers, take an average of that, and say that's the one that applies.
For any new construction.
For any new construction.
Now, the house to the south that's being built, okay, what was done for the setbacks of that house?
They took the averages of the north and south.
North and south.
That's right.
Did not, I'm
that's a single
presuming,
house.
didn't go,
a single house to the north, not the house across the canal.
I'm just presuming it didn't go to Corn Apples, is that right?
I can't answer that, and in the examples that we gave you, all we can show you is that we know for sure they took the adjacent houses.
Okay.
With that, I think the Figure 4 under the definitional section, and also within the ordinance itself, under the residential R1A section of the ordinance, would tell you that you look beyond just the first two homes. And that's the example that we provided. So that's what we did.
Well, there's no rigorous formula for this. Your only point is you should consider houses on adjacent.
Right. In all instances, that's correct, sir. In all instances, the adjacent house on either side was considered. Even if there was a vacant lot in between them or there was a road in between them, they still applied that for the infill house.
Yeah, see, that's the point that one of the people on board made, is that we look at each situation as unique and we try to make a determination. And even though some situations, they are not unique and you can draw comparisons.
Well, and in each area, the average may be different. One area may have been developed differently, so we're looking at the average for this area here.
Or you could have a house that really is out of the norm, and then we, as a board, would say that's not part of the piece that we would consider. That's part of looking at unique situations.
But again, what the ordinance requires is consistency in application, and that prevents the zoning officer in reviewing an application from deciding him or herself that I'm going to ignore that. And here it says setback of adjoining structures. That's pretty clear, adjoining. The Cornhuffel property is adjoining. If you're not going to, if that's not a neighbor, I don't know what is. The neighbor is to the south. The fact that there's a canal between the two of them, based upon past precedent when the township doesn't matter, there's still a boundary there. There's still the adjacent property in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, can we...
Did your client take that into consideration when they built their home?
I believe their home was built prior to the adoption of the ordinance.
But they lined it up in adjacent to the homes that are to the north?
They lined it up in a manner not to interfere with anybody's view corridor to the shoreline, whether to the south or to the north. It's clear that that is the case. Well, you can see that from the view corridor itself. If you look at Exhibit 1, there's no interference with view.
I guess my question is more specific. the way it was built, it does not interfere with the view, but how do we know that it wasn't taken into consideration?
Well, the fact of the matter is it doesn't.
Do you have the zoning official's paperwork that says whether or not he considered north and south
When
zoning properties?
the Cornhuffel House was built in 1990, I do not believe this section of the zoning ordinance existed at that time. I could be mistaken, but I don't believe it was. We are now dealing with what it is today, and the ordinance requires consistency in application. The master plan requires consistency in application. In this case, the Cornhuffel residence is constructed in a way, as shown on parcel 3, that does not interfere with the view corridors of 1, 2, the Finazzo residence, or any of the other residences that are located there.
The fact that there's a line between the Cornhuffel property, was that two properties adjoined into one, or is it still?
This is one, the boundary line between the two runs down the middle of the canal.
Yeah, and then there's another boundary line that runs down the grass where the 3 is on.
Mr. Cornhuffel owns both those parcels, and I'm not sure whether or not the balance of the parcel to the south is I don't know if it's a developable parcel or not.
Are they still separate parcels, though, or are they, have they been combined?
I couldn't answer that question. And all I know is, again, when we look through the examples, if there was a vacant lot, even though it was separately owned, it didn't change the position of the zoning officer in doing it.
I'm just curious if you knew.
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that from a zoning standpoint, if one lot's insufficient for a separate building, that
I'd like to move along.
Okay.
You got anything else? Okay, thank you. Now, from the audience, is there anybody in the audience that wants to, will you step forward, please? Name, address.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Gaber, and I'm an attorney at Williams, Radner, and Plunkett, and I represent Dr. Salvatore Finazzo. Dr. Finazzo is back here, as well as Todd Young from Young Architects. We just have a few comments I'd like to elaborate on and to go further than what the applicant said. First of all, I want to make sure that the board received our letter dated August 22nd, with our information that we submitted. Is that in your packets? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Dr. Finazzo bought this property with the idea to build an attractive house on it that the community would be proud of. He doesn't disagree with any of the policy statements that the applicant has set forth here that are in the zoning ordinance. He believes in those, and that's one of the reasons why he wants to be here and wants to build his house here. He appreciates the shoreline setback issue and the view corridors and the open space requirements of the ordinance, and it's his goal and his desire to follow those as well. Where we differ from the applicant is how the ordinances are interpreted to facilitate those setbacks and such. And I think what's key that was missing in the last analysis is what the ordinance requires is that you look at the neighborhood, the appropriate neighborhood, to figure out what the neighborhood setback line is when you're determining the building line and such. That's what the ordinance requires. And if you do that, if you look at the neighborhood, you've got to define exactly what the neighborhood is. Now, a lot of the information that's been provided about other situations kind of extrapolates as to what they believe the neighborhood is in that situation and is not. In this case, we think it's pretty clear. If you look at the neighborhoods here, we think, if I could, we think it's pretty clear that there are two separate neighborhoods here, and that's what the zoning officer thought as well. If you look at the development of the houses north of the canal versus south of the canal, they're in different subdivisions, they're on different roads, and you clearly see different shoreline setbacks being used for those two separate neighborhoods. Now, each neighborhood is consistent within itself. If you look at the north neighborhood where the Cornapple house is, the shoreline setback is about 220 to 230 feet from the water along that stretch of homes. But if you look at the homes on Lighthouse Point, the shoreline setback is different. It's about 140, roughly. I'm just estimating here. But it's a different shoreline setback that's used. If you look at those homes, you can see that they didn't take one another into consideration, the north and the south, when they determined where those setback lines were, because they're consistent on the north, and then they're different but consistent on the south. So those are the neighborhoods, and that's what's required in the ordinance when you're looking at the applying the ordinance and determining what the building line is and such. A couple of other points. It would have been helpful to have this information ahead of time. There's a lot here to digest, and Mr. Stoker did a great job of presenting this information, given the fact that we didn't have any time to review it. But what I think is important to remember is a couple of things. Number one, how you define the neighborhood. Number two, if you look at your job under the ordinance, you have to clearly find that the zoning officer did one of those things that's mentioned here: acted arbitrarily and capriciously, failed to ensure consistency, made an error with inaccurate information, or did something that constituted an abuse of discretion. If you don't clearly find that, then you're not supposed to overturn the zoning officer in this case. And so I would ask you to look at that very carefully. One other point I would like to make is if you look at the plans that have been proposed, Dr. Finazzo is not trying to be piggish here. He's not trying to put his house as close to the water as possible. If you look at the plans that were approved by the zoning officer, you can see where the prior house was on this property. And the prior house that was there that's now demolished was closer to the water than where the current house is proposed. There's a corner here. If you look at this line right here, this is the boundary of the prior house. It's about a 10-foot by 10-foot corner. We took that off in our plan design to create more open space and a better vision line for the Corneffels than previously existed with the old house. And if you look at the setback lines in the building envelope, essentially this is the shoreline setback right here, and this is the side setback with the canal. This whole thing is a building envelope. So Dr. Finazzo could have proposed a house that used up more of the building envelope, which he didn't do, because he is appreciative of the shoreline setback and does want to respect his neighbors and the views that his neighbor has. So I believe if you look at it from that standpoint, if you look at the standard of the ordinance that you're supposed to apply, if you look at the definition of neighborhood under your own zoning ordinance, and if you look at the purpose here, the intent, essentially what the ordinance is trying to do is it's trying to not to inhibit somebody's view from the water. And that's not happening here. If you look at where the old house is and you look at where the new house is, quite the contrary. The new house takes up less of the view of the Corneffels than the old house did. So based on these factors, we would certainly ask you to uphold the decision of the zoning officer and affirm his approval of the plans so that Dr. Finazzo can get a building permit and essentially begin construction of his house. Now, Todd or Salvo, did you have anything to add? Okay. Thank you for your time this evening.
Hold on. Are there any questions from the board? Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to entertain any comments from the audience. Can we get, so we have a person in the back? Yes? Name?
Me?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Name and address?
Yes, Catherine Schrader.
Speak into the mic.
Catherine Schrader, okay, 19477 Lighthouse Point. I think we're all here tonight because Dr. Fernazzo went ahead and tried to get his building lot in place and tore the old house down. Because if he hadn't done that, I don't think we'd be here tonight. Anyway, Carl and I moved to Lighthouse Point in 1972. And when I brought this along, as I can't point this, but here, this is us. We are the only old house left on Lighthouse Point. If we start from the south, there was Starling's tore down Carmazon's house, and then we go up to Manza's tore down Lloyd Taylor's house, and Tom Stanko is now building in the lot that occupied by George Devlin. The house next door that Bruce Boardman has burned and to the ground, and they replaced that. Then our house, then Dr. Kuhn remodeled his house, and then the vacant lot, Paisley's, moved into that, and then there was Tony Kazaworski's house on the end. And all through the 40 years we've been there, the neighbors have gotten along, and as these new homes were built, we all had wine and cheese, and we talked about the setbacks, and we all agreed that nobody would try to interfere with anybody else's view. I mean, this is how we did it. We're a neighborhood. We're the Lighthouse Point neighborhood. We support the lighthouse. We do all sorts of things together. We even had a rhubarb festival. But anyway, so I just wanted to point out that we are a neighborhood. We are not the neighborhood north of the canal. We're the neighborhood south of the canal. We've gotten along. We've agreed on this setback, and I would like to be able to strongly urge you that Dr. Fernazzo be required to uphold the setback for our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
There's one that should be read.
We received a letter, and it is to Zoning Board of Appeals. It's from Dennis and Diane Reckley, 19465 Lighthouse Point. And the letter basically says, the letter is in regard to the request by Mr. Curtis Knofel regarding the new single-family residence of 19445 Lighthouse Point. We do not support Mr. Kronefel's request. We believe the new owners of Lot 8 and 9 should be allowed to enjoy the same zoning privileges as the previous structure on this piece of property, as well as our structure and others in the Lighthouse Point subdivision. To grant this request would put an unnecessary hardship and would severely limit the size of structure on this premier piece of property. We request you deny Mr. Kronefel's request and find in favor of the landowner of lots 8 and 9, 19445 Lighthouse Point. Thank you for your consideration, Dennis and Diane Reckley. That letter should go in the record. Do we have any other comments regarding? Yes.
Appreciate the opportunity to make our presentation to the board. As revealed by the information we submitted, it is not the objectives of Mr. and Mrs. Kornhoffel to prevent the Fernazos from building a beautiful and attractive home on their property, which only enhances everybody else's properties and values as well. In fact, as we've demonstrated, the proposed house can be built in the same design on the property at the setback required by the ordinance. It does not diminish the size of that house, and it does not diminish their views to the river. It requires consistent application of the ordinance. So the request that we're asking for, that consistent application, does not interfere with that. Though there was a prior house on that property at a different location, as we know, once that house is removed and it becomes vacant and undeveloped, that the standards as relates to that house do not apply, as the ordinance to the new house is what applies. And third, I think one of the most important factors with regard to the adjacent property here is, what is the objective? The objective is to make sure that the shoreline views are preserved along the shoreline. That is the objective and goal. And that is the proposed, that is what we're urging this board to do, is say, make sure that the ordinance is consistently enforced the way that it is intended to be enforced, preserving those shoreline views in a consistent manner. as opposed to allowing the zoning officer, based upon his different views, to change the application of the ordinance. It says adjacent homes, it shows a number of homes. It doesn't say ignore your next door neighbor to the north. It doesn't say ignore the next door neighbor to the south. And if anybody's a next door neighbor, the Cornuffles are next door neighbors. Thank you.
You know, I took an opportunity to walk the property, both the Cornfield's property and the property to the south, and I stood on the porch of the Cornfield's property. I looked out into the water and seeing what, if I had any obstructions, any vision obstructions. I mean, from my standpoint, I really didn't see any obstructions, and it was a pretty clear view. Now, that's my vision. That's what I saw when I walked the property. So, and then also, you know, and again, this is my interpretation of neighborhoods. The neighborhood, as I see it, you have properties to the south that are very consistent in setbacks, and you have properties north of the canal that are very consistent setback-wise. So you look at that as, can that possibly be construed as separate neighborhoods? And I think a reasonable person would look at that and say, yeah, I can consider that as separate neighborhoods because of the consistencies on both sides. So those are my comments. Are there any other comments from the board? Okay, with that, can we get a motion for the appeal?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we bring case number, appeal number 12-002 to a vote, yes signifying approval, which is really a denial of the appeal, or approval of the appeal, yes signifying approval of the appeal, no signifying a denial of the appeal. Yes, I think, is that right, ma'am? No, I said the motion is we bring it to a vote. Yes signifying approval of the appeal, no signifying denial of the appeal. Or nay. Is that right?
Your motion should either be make a motion to approve the appeal or make a motion to deny the appeal.
Okay.
Yeah, you have,
all right,
John, you have to say approve the appeal or deny the appeal.
Okay.
So what are you saying?
Well, I would not vote to approve the, so I would move that we deny the approval of the appeal.
So is that your motion?
Yes.
That's the motion. You got a second? Comments? Any comments from the board?
So you have to ask all those in favor?
Yeah, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion is denied.
You didn't take any notes. We didn't have any notes.
The comment is there were no nays. I think from surveying the board, I think we had 5 votes. So with that, the appeal is denied. Okay, our next appeal is appeal number 12-005, which is Gary Ames, president of the Grosse Ile Rowing Club, 25432 Grosse Ile, Michigan. Can we have the Gary Ames, is Gary Ames the presenter for this one? You want to get to the microphone?
Okay.
Who are you?
Pardon me?
Can you have your name and your address?
Yeah, Gary Ames, 254327.
Okay.
In Groseville.
You want to make the,
Again.
you're going to present the appeal? And what we're going to do here is we're going to have Brian Borden give the overview, and then you can make, and after he gives the overview, you can make your presentation. You can stay where you are.
Mr. Chair, this time I am going to use the...
Okay.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry, we just wanted to get set up there. So the request before you this evening has to do with two-dimensional variances sought by the Groseville Rowing Club. The variances are related to the southwestern portion of the West Shore Golf and Country Club property. And if you can sort of follow the cursor in here, it's sort of this general vicinity of what is currently vacant land between the established parking lot and the southerly property line of the West Shore Golf and Country Club property. So the two specific variances before you this evening have to do, one, with a proposed reduction in the minimum lot area for properties in the R1A district. There's a caveat to that in that R1E overlay also applies in this situation. Ultimately, what the applicant is seeking, or would be seeking, would be a land division if the variances are approved. So I'm going to get to a couple more slides. I'm going to sort of outline a full process that's necessary here. But in essence, that's what this is all related to, is a potential future land division request, and then so on and so on. So that is the first item. As proposed, they are looking to split off a 26,932 square foot piece. The R1E overlay requires a 30,000 square foot minimum. The second variance has to do with the fact that the proposed northerly boundary of this newly created parcel would essentially abut the established parking lot for West Shore. Your ordinance requires a 10-foot setback for off-street parking. So that would be the second variance that you'll be dealing with this evening. In terms of the general area here, we are on the east side of West River, north of Ferry Road. I've oriented this such that we're looking east, north is left, just to mess with everybody, keep you on your toes. As I mentioned, the site is zoned R1A currently. However, if it was proposed for a land division, the requirements of the R1E district would then apply, as they would be creating a new buildable lot. Those specific regulations are found in section 3.5 of your ordinance, and in addition, obviously we'll be focusing on the dimensional variance criteria of section 23.5 as well.
Is a variance required not having access to a road by this lot? Is there a variance required?
15 years and I felt my legs. The chair slipped out from under me.
Is there any requirement for a variance of not having access to a road, whether it's West River or anything else to this particular parcel?
They would have access to the road. The entire parcel fronts West River Road. They have almost 200 feet of frontage along West River.
Is the section not, does the section touch West River Road?
This is West River right here.
I understand, but there's no driveway or there's no access.
Here's the road here.
I understand, but there's no access to this
We're not
parcel other
okay.
than through the parking lot.
Let's take a step back.
Okay.
If variances are approved, the applicant needs to go through the land division process, which is Planning Commission recommendation to Township Board. They would need to go through the special land use process because it's a boat club, which is a Planning Commission recommendation to the Township Board. And they would also have to go through the site plan review process. The focus of this really has to do with whether or not they could create this lot via the land division process. Access would be something that will be determined at the time of site plan review. The property itself, as proposed, and again, I'm going to use the cursor here, I don't know if this helps much, but the property that would be proposed to be split off from West Shore does have sufficient lot width and road frontage along West River Road. So just to make sure that's clear, that there's no need for variance in that particular situation. The ordinance requires a minimum 60-foot street frontage. They have well over that. The ordinance also, if we apply R1E, requires 125-foot lot width, which again, they exceed that as well.
I apologize, but I'm suggesting that the 66 by 85 foot parcel has no access to a road.
That's not the parcel.
That's not the parcel?
No. The proposed lot lines would, if you can follow the hand. No, that's fair. I didn't make that clear. So the proposed parcel to be split is actually this larger piece. I believe, and I'll have to defer to the applicant, I believe they were trying to show a bit of a building envelope as part of their project. So sorry about that. That's a great case in point. Obviously, we're saying the same thing, we're just talking a different language. I can go back to the site plan if necessary. So a few quick ordinance items. As I've already noted, Section 3.5 in this instance would require the standards of the R1E district because we would be creating a new buildable lot. Section 3.5 under R1E standards does require a 30,000 square foot lot minimum as well as 125-foot lot width. Again, 30,000 square foot is one of the variances sought. 125-foot lot width would be compliant. Section 12.1, which are your parking regulations, requires a 10-foot setback for off-street parking lot. The proposed lot to be created would essentially provide a 0-foot or a 0 lot line for that established parking lot. And then our standard items, 23.5B lays out 14 separate review criteria for your consideration as it relates to demonstrating the need or the justification for the variances that are sought. So a quick summary, you all have my review letter. There are, I pointed out a couple of concerns, and I think the applicant will be best served to address those once I finish and once we get through question and answer. But in quick summary, in terms of West Shore's continued use of the property, a variance would not be necessary. West Shore could actually develop that property without the need for a land division, therefore no need for variances. Alternatives would include identifying and proposing a split for a slightly larger area. The one issue or the two issues that are noted in the submittal by the rowing club with that are obviously the placement of the existing parking lot, which would be essentially along the proposed northerly lot line, as well as one of the golf holes, which abuts their proposed parcel to the east. I can potentially go back if this will let me. There we go. So just that is, as noted again by the applicant, those are two of the constraints in terms of providing a larger lot area. The other alternative, and again, I'll let the applicant speak a little bit more to this because I think they have something to say on this. Obviously, the other alternative would be to seek out a different piece of property. And I can tell you, I know they've been looking for a very long time. I'm going to let them tell you that. You don't need to hear that from me. A couple of points that I do think the applicant needs to respond to this evening is demonstrating why compliance is burdensome. In this instance, this is your practical difficulty test, and why it is not simply a matter of convenience. Those are words right out of your ordinance. It's also unclear how allowing a parcel smaller than would normally be allowed in a district is fair to surrounding property owners. That's language straight from your substantial justice criterion. And then the fifth point is, as part of your extraordinary circumstance criterion, again, I don't, in my opinion, I don't believe the submittal clearly identifies a unique circumstance of the property that has put them in front of you to justify the variances. So obviously, we have a lot to discuss tonight, and they have every opportunity to try to address those for you. Those are just a few of my initial concerns based on the submittal. A couple other points from my review letter would include the fact that there are a couple of standards that relate to the potential future or intended development of the property. And I do point out that a couple of things. One, the largest piece of property in this area is already developed for a recreational purpose, a non-residential use, if you will. So ultimately, this could be construed as being consistent from a use standpoint. Also, that any concerns of impacts to neighboring properties, at this point anyway, they're only requesting these two variances. Therefore, if this project was pursued, was ultimately kept going through step by step, there would be setback requirements, there would be screening and buffering and landscaping requirements. So in essence, there are other standards that are in place that are really to help ensure that surrounding properties are protected by a potential development and how it is developed and how it's used as well. The special land use will focus on, to some degree, the operation of the site, again, if it's created. So my last point, I jumped ahead because I wanted to make sure we were on the same page. If this is approved this evening, or in the future if the variances were granted, then there are still the three remaining procedures that the applicant would have to go through, beginning with land division to create the property. And then if the property were created, then they would have to follow up with the special land use for a boat club, as well as ultimately the site plan review as part of the actual design and layout of the development for the property.
Any questions of Brian?
I do have one question. I do have one question. And you may not be the person to answer it, but you raised the question for me. All of this is necessary. Would the rowing club be able to do what it wants to do? You had said the West Shore Club could use this property in any way it wanted to without making any of these requests. Is that true?
I didn't exactly say in any way they wanted to. They could utilize the property. They would still be bound by the regulations of the zoning ordinance.
Yes, but they wouldn't have to ask for the variance. Say they
That's correct.
They wanted to build a structure on that parcel. They could do so without asking a variance?
So long as it complied with your ordinance standards.
With other ordinance
correct.
standards.
There's a potential that it would also, it might require a re-review of the special land use. Your special land use regulations have provisions for amendments or expansions of established special land uses. So it is possible, if depending upon, again, it's hypothetical, depending on what they did, how they did it, yes, they could utilize that property without the need to split it, and then without the need to split it, generally speaking, you would not have the need for the variances.
So then I guess a follow-up question would be to the applicant why they are pursuing this particular method.
I will defer that to the applicant.
That's what I'm saying. That would be my follow-up then. Okay. Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Brian, I have one. The property is zoned R1D.
This portion is actually zoned R1A.
R1.
The West River frontage is zoned R1A.
The West River frontage, the frontage across West River Road is R1A.
As is the east side of the of West River.
Now, I was looking at the zoning. It said it was R1D.
I believe the R1D is behind. I believe the R1A is in this area.
Is actually the golf course.
That's the golf course.
The front of the property is R1A.
Right.
The front of the property is R1A.
But the golf course part itself is R1D.
You guys don't. Please use your microphones because the people watching on television will not be able to hear what we're saying.
Not okay. What I'm saying is the golf course part of it is R1D, but the front part of it is R1A.
I'll switch this over, Mr. Chair. The street frontage is R1A.
The street front is R1A, the golf course is R1D.
Right, fundamentally, right. Oh, it's very blurry.
Right. There you go.
So, in essence, trying to follow this.
Part is R1A.
We're in this area here. The east side, the street frontage of West River Road is zoned R1A.
Now, that clubhouse, is that clubhouse in R1A or is it in R1D?
I have absolutely no idea.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a site plan good enough to
Yeah, I was looking at that and it almost, and then we were talking about an R1E overlay.
That is correct. To be honest, it really doesn't matter whether it's R1A, R1B, R1D. If in your ordinance, the residential zoning districts have an overlay zoning district over them, which is the R1E district. Anytime you try to create a new buildable parcel, the standards of R1E then kick in.
And that's where we come with the 30,000 square feet, because if it was R1D, it'd be 20,000.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Yeah, so that, I was looking at that, and but the R1E overlay district, it takes precedent.
Correct, because they're proposing to create a new buildable lot.
Right.
The ironic thing in this particular instance is, again, because the site itself is zoned R1A as currently, R1A is also a 30,000 square foot district. So really the biggest difference has to do with the lot width, which is not an issue in this case. So.
Yeah, okay, that's, I just wanted to get embedded in my mind the 30,000 requirement. The 30,000 requirement was the R1E overlay.
Correct.
Okay.
So Brian, none of this has anything to do with the property on the water side, right? They're just leasing them that.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And just one other educational question. The 3 phases that you go through,
yes.
Are they distinct phases, or are they all done at one time?
Generally speaking, the township will have to deal with that when the time comes. It would be my professional opinion, my preference, that the land division be completed first, such that we have an actual newly created parcel, and then we would follow that up. It is very common for special land use and site plan review to run concurrently because they're so intertwined. The use and the design and the operation of the use and the development of the property really are almost one and the same. So that's, again, we'll see what occurs. But that is not, in all likelihood, that's probably what would happen pending the variance.
In the end, it's up to the board then.
Correct.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Can we get the person appealing?
Yes. Yeah, I'm Gary Ames, president of the Grosseto Rowing Club. I'd like to give, this is a lot of support from us. And then I'm going to present some background about the rowing club, and then I'm going to introduce one of our board members, Eric Flesland, who's going to make the presentation itself or go through some of the issues. The Grosseto Rowing Club is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was formed to support the Grosseto High School rowing program. And this facility is a facility where we're trying to locate on Grosseto for the students who compete for the high school rowing program, as well as possibly a middle school program to get a more youth involved in rowing. So So we're really oriented towards trying to have more opportunity for the kids to be able to row and have more access to the river. And we have been, as Brian mentioned, I've been involved with the rowing club for 8 years. Over that period, it's been a goal to get a facility on Groseal. We've investigated various sites and which didn't work out for one reason or another. We've been in discussions with West Shore for probably 6 months and talked about different issues and we identified this piece of property as a piece of property that would work as we're concerned. We're always concerned about the safety to the students who are involved, as well as the what would create a good location for a rowing facility on Groseal. And now I'd like to introduce Eric Flesland. He's one of our board members who's going to discuss some of the issues that Brian alluded to. And then we'll take any questions. I also have Scott Setek, the head coach of the Groseal High School rowing program, to address any questions as we move along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Eric Flesland, 8265 Thorntree Court. I appreciate, first of all, you are considering our application. I consider Mr. Borden's presentation to be thorough, even-handed, and I appreciate that as well. He went through he identified the factors that you need to consider, and I thought presented them well. As he said, he left 2 questions for us to address. Those principally are why the compliance with the ordinance is burdensome, and secondly, whether granting the variance would be fair to the property owners, the other property owners in the district. I'll turn to the first question first. And as you well know, the standard for granting a non-use dimensional variance is whether or not there's a practical difficulty complying with the ordinance. Practical difficulty is demonstrated by several factors. The first is special or unique conditions or circumstances exist which are peculiar to this piece of property and that are generally not applicable throughout other parcels in the district. And what makes this parcel, or more accurately, proposed parcel, unique are the physical characteristics of the property. And I know you have Brian's color photograph, which is a lot better than this, but first of all, to clarify, we apologize for any confusion. We were trying to at least give some relative consideration of where a building would ultimately be placed. Those dimensions are not entirely accurate. It's just sort of demonstrative. And we apologize for any confusion that may have presented. But as you can see, very well. As you can see, it's roughly trapezoidal in shape. The longest leg is fronting West River Road. The south property line is fairly straight, and the other 2 property lines, as you head east, narrow the property. As Brian showed you, the north property line follows the existing parking lot of West Shore, and the east leg of this trapezoid then abuts an existing and established golf hole. Directly behind that is actually the tee for the 18th green, the 18th hole. This unique shape is created because there are essentially fixed points that prevent the creation of a traditional, more rectangular lot that would comply with the 30,000 square foot requirement. West River obviously is to the west. We can't move that. Existing property line to the south can't change that, nor would we wish to. And so we were left with adjusting the north and the east property line. The existing parking lot borders to the north, and it was quickly, it's pretty self-evident. It's unreasonably burdensome to reconfigure and repave that parking lot for the sole purpose of moving property lines for the creation of this property. So we were realistically left with the east property line. And this is as much as we can get without encroaching into the golf course. Now, early on in the sort of the negotiation stages, everyone was trying to, we recognized, first of all, that this lot would be under 30,000 square feet. And so we were trying to figure out, well, perhaps there's something else we could do. And one of the things that was sort of thrown out is a initial brainchild. Well, let's see if we can purchase that piece of property in the golf course, including the existing tee, and then grant the golf course a greenbelt easement so that we'll never develop on it. We'll just simply own it in name, and that way we will, through this artificial construct, get past the 30,000 square foot requirement and never have to ask for a variance. Sounds very simple and elementary, and as you all well know, the devil's in the details. There are a host of issues, liability issues from golfing on private property, and maintenance issues, and frankly, the notion of members playing golf on private property was really a non-starter, and reasonably the golf course said no, that this is as far as we can go with this piece of property. So we are, through those constructs, this is what we have, or what is presented to us. But if you think about it, had we gone through the artificial construct and purchased that property, then granted the greenbelt easement, we'd be achieving the same thing as what we're asking for in this variance. The golf course is never going to develop that property behind us. And so rather than be cute and try to finagle our way around the zoning restrictions, we came to the board with exactly what we have here up front, but in essence, no difference. If you think about it, given the fact that the frontage, the lot is wider than the minimum requirements for lots in this district, there's a stand of trees to the rear of the property here along the golf course, and the fact that you have this golf course, this expanse of undeveloped land that continues well beyond our property line, the lot appears to be a lot larger than 30,000 square feet, required to be compliant, and it functions as if it were fully compliant had we gone through this greenbelt construct. So if you were to grant the requested variance, it will be consistent with the nature and character of the district, and thus harmonious with good planning principles and do no harm to the public. As we said, the lot size is 26,932 square feet. We are only roughly 3,000 square feet short of a fully compliant R1E overlay district lot. The shortage is roughly 20 feet by 150 feet, or roughly the size of a small parking lot. However, with the leased shared parking arrangement with the golf course to the north, we will not need parking and therefore will not need that 20 by 150 square foot area. And as Brian pointed out, we also exceed the adjoining property area requirements by over 6,000 square feet if it was an R1D property. So one of the other factors you're to consider are the use and development of property immediately adjoining this proposed lot. Obviously, West Golf Course, immediately to the north, and its parking lot service its members in their recreational use, and the proposed use here is entirely consistent with that, a training center for high school students preparing and training for high school rowing meets. And then, as Gary mentioned, in the summer, it's envisioned to have rowing programs available to middle school students to introduce more students, more young people to the sport of rowing, and hopefully develop a feeder program then to the high school, much like Little League for the high school baseball program. So, one of the questions you asked is why this odd-shaped lot? And the answer is there's no other reasonable alternatives available for this parcel. And if this variance is denied, both variances are denied, the project's dead, and we're back to searching for another parcel. So given the unique nature of the property, a literal interpretation of the provisions of the ordinance would deprive Grosse Ile Rowing Club of the rights commonly enjoyed by other property owners within the district. The second issue that we were asked to address is how would this approval be fair to other owners in the area, or conversely unfair to owners in the area. The granting of the variances we're asking for is in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the ordinance. The proposed lot size recognizes and preserves the unique character of this neighborhood. These are large lots, without doubt, and this creates a large lot that is only marginally short of the minimum requirements. In fact, as you mentioned, across the front, it greatly exceeds the minimum requirements for lot sizes, and with abandoning the green belt construct, essentially we are functioning as if we were fully compliant. There's no evidence of any negative impact on property values, as was mentioned, from a marginally smaller lot. The property currently zoned R1D only required 20,000 square feet. This lot substantially exceeds that. Where property values may be affected would be if we were creating a substantially smaller lot and then building a residence on that, and then a parcel would become available to use as comps for sales of future residences. Apples to apples comparison. That is not our intended use of this property, and therefore would never be used as a comp. So there's really no negative impact on the property values. And I'm sure you read my letter, our initial petition, and it may have sounded a little cheesy, but I truly believe that if you build this, they will come. All right? I mean, you all can envision the boats gliding on the water, and then you can imagine a potential property, a buyer, coming to Grosse Ile to look at the properties and seeing that and saying, you know what, that's pretty cool. That's pretty unique. It's one additional factor that makes Grosse Ile a beautiful and a desirable place to live. So I think it's not far-fetched to say it will enhance property values, not diminish property values. So, and as was noted in the report, and I won't be redundant and go over it, the proposed variances will not be harmful or alter the essential character of the area in which the property is located. It will not impair the enjoyment of adjacent property. It will not unreasonably increase congestion in public streets or in case create some additional fire safety hazard. And therefore, I think we have demonstrated and met the burden of demonstrating that this is, there isn't a practical impossibility or a difficulty in meeting the ordinances as written, and the variances ought to be granted. Are there any questions?
Any questions for the board?
I just want to clarify that I understand it correctly now. Essentially, the rowing club will be purchasing this parcel from West Shore, but will be leasing access to the water frontage.
Correct.
And when I read it, I understood that you would be leasing this property as well as the water frontage, and I think that's why I started wondering why go through all this if we don't have to.
Right. No, West Shore will retain ownership of the waterfront property.
Yeah.
They will lease that to the rowing club and lease the parking lot area, and if you can envision it, it's the area furthest from the clubhouse. So it seldom gets used unless it's during a tournament, and the hours of use of the parking lot are disparate, and therefore the West Shore has concluded that there will not be conflicting use, and it's consistent with their use of that parking lot.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
I have one question.
Sure.
You talked about not being able to get the 30,000 square feet because of the 18th tee.
Yes.
You know, that was the reason for that. But why can't you go to the north? And you have a big parking lot there to the north. That's the West Shore parking lot?
Yes. I can only tell you that West Shore was not willing to sell its parking lot.
Yeah, see, because
Again, because I believe of the liability concerns of they would then be parking on our private property, and maintenance concerns, and I don't believe the membership would have condoned selling a piece of their parking lot for convenience of meeting that 30,000 square foot. That would have certainly solved the issue, and we wouldn't be asking for the variance.
yeah, so you did negotiate, talk to West Shore about that?
Oh, it's been going on, as Gary said, for 6 months. And every alternative was
West
addressed.
Shore parking is based on West Shore usage. And so you really couldn't alter your parking lot without going through another site plan review.
Yes.
So that's required.
Yeah, we couldn't.
Right, right. So we can't alter that.
Thank you for, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, we solved that.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't do that.
All right, okay. Do you have anything else to add?
No, sir.
Okay, you have somebody else that wants to make a presentation here?
No, Mr. Seatek is here to answer questions regarding the program if they arose.
Okay, the other question I have is how are you getting this structure, 66 by 85 structure? That's going to be a structure?
It's demonstrative. I can't tell you those are the final dimensions, and
Will you
probably
store
are
the
not.
boats there?
Pardon me?
Will you store the boats there?
The rowing, and you're going to hit me because I'm going to use the wrong term, the skulls and boats.
The
The
skulls.
boats. The long, narrow, cigar-shaped boats would be
And then
stored
you
there.
intend to store them there and then carry them across West River into the water? Right?
Correct.
That's your process?
Yes.
Well, I do have one question. Looking at your plan, you have a lined-off place back of where the building is?
No, that was, if I can point out to you.
What is that space again?
This was just showing the setbacks from the
Yeah,
property.
okay.
That's all that was intended.
Oh, that's all just showing?
No, and
Okay.
it is our intent to be substantially or greater, exceed the minimum setbacks. It's our intent to be a good neighbor to everyone in this neighborhood, and so there won't, it was just sort of for our purposes of situating this, getting whether you move further back or forward, so that it would be advantageous where it's located for construction, yet maintain more than the minimum setback requirements from the property lines. That's all that was intended to show.
Yeah, see, there's two variances that are before us. One is the lot size.
Yes.
And the other one is the setback for the parking thing. Now,
Yes, along
that's
the
a
north.
10-foot. That's a 10-foot setback, which actually diminishes the use of of the lot.
Yes.
Okay.
So that, that's what. So you acknowledge that diminishes that. Because,
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
No question. Just,
No questions.
I have a comment.
What I'd like to do first is go to the audience. Do we have anybody in the audience that would care to make a comment? Yes, we have the person in the back.
Good evening. My name is Ed Kosteroff. I live at 23215 West River. It is the house that is on the corner, south corner of Ferry. First, let me tell you that I am pro-rowing. I had two daughters that rowed. I personally was involved with the rowing club for 9 years. President is 4. Did a number of things for the rowing club. So, first and foremost, I want you to know that I'm pro-rowing. I don't want it in my neighborhood. The reason for that is, if you know rowing at all or if you're familiar with it, it's quite a noisy sport in the morning at 5:30 or 6 o'clock when the kids are getting out. They're going to the rowing club, they're driving over there, and kids are kids, and they make noise. But they also have a PA system, for a lack of a better term, called a cox box, which is in the boat, and the coxswain is telling the rowers in the boat what to do. The coaches have megaphones, and they're telling the coxes and the rowers what to do. At 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, I don't want to hear 2 or 3 coaches hollering at 6 or 8 boats or 4 or 5 boats right in my immediate neighborhood. If any of you live on the water, and I don't know whether you do or not, but that sound carries immensely. I can hear them when they row up from Wyandotte now, and they have a wonderful facility in Wyandotte to currently row with. I would ask that the zoning board ask the rowing club to look for another facility, another area, maybe Water's Edge Recreation Area. There's got to be a place where this can go where it won't impact homeowners. It is going to be noisy. And it's not just the high school rowing season, which is, from mid-January they start working out, and then they start rowing on the water as soon as the ice is gone, and then they row through the very beginning of June. And then summer rowing starts, and as the gentleman alluded to, they want to get and develop a program for junior highs and high schoolers through the summer, maybe adults, maybe whoever else wants to row and learn to row, which I did through the e-course program. But it's going to impact all of the neighbors in our area, both to the north and the south, especially those that are close to the club that are going to hear this constant coaching going on, and it's something that needs to be done. When they rowed out of E-Course Boat Club in the very beginning, you had no homeowners down there. It was on Southfield, at Jefferson by Southfield. It was all businesses in there or the park. At Wyandotte, you've got the golf course and Point Hennepin across the street, across the river. The noise isn't impacting anybody. It will now. A couple of issues I'd like to just mention concerning the ordinance requirements. I think, number one, I was glad to hear, I didn't see or understand that they were leasing property. I only saw property on the west side of West River, on the east side of East River. They had no, in that 26,900 and some square feet, there was no water access. Maybe they can buy some of that water access to make up that 3,000 square feet. I don't know. That's not my issue. I would really not like to see it there. But the permit says, the process says, is this a mere inconvenience? I think it is a mere inconvenience. They looked at it. It's good for West Shore. They can sell this lot off. But where's the 3,000 square feet going to come from? It's available. They just don't want to park with it. It's either the parking lot, which would be a triangular piece of property, starting at West River at the 170 feet of frontage and running back to the lot that they're proposing to sell. They could sell them a triangular piece to make that parking lot. They have plenty of parking, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know the ordinance of how many spots they need. But if the ordinance is right there right now, then you add rowing, which will probably put conservatively 30 more people down there. Do you now have enough parking for all of this? I don't know. I don't think so. But they do have a mere inconvenience. They could make this work if they needed to make it happen. The other item says, does it adversely affect the people in the neighborhood? I feel I will be adversely affected by the noise. If I go to sell my property, is somebody going to want to buy that piece of property knowing that the noise is right there and they're going to hear it? I would ask you, do you want it in front of your house? Do you want to hear 30 to 40 kids, Cox boxes, coaches, outboard motors at 5:30 in the morning? 9 o'clock in the morning? Who cares? 5:30? Different game. I thank you for your time. I ask you if you would be so kind and wise as to turn this application down and from the zoning board because they don't have the square feet and the impact it will have on the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the audience? Yes.
My name is Stuart Keeler, 23145. We happen to be Lot 2, which is right next to where you're going to, they want to build their building, okay? About property values and about inconveniencing the neighbors. Yes, we have a golf course right next to us. They've been very good neighbors. They start around 8 o'clock in the morning. Their game is quiet. You know, they're very quiet when they are. We don't even hear them playing. We probably don't even hear them until 5 o'clock in the afternoon when it's happy hour. But at 5:30 in the morning, for noise and shouting and loudspeakers and so forth, our property values are going to sink real fast. Second, I do a lot of my work from 8 o'clock at night until 12, maybe 1 in the morning. And then I go to bed and get some sleep. And to be awakened every morning at 5 or 5:30 is going to be really bad for me. Now, Gary Ames was very nice to come over to our house one Sunday and explain the whole thing. And my wife Denise and I were really in favor of this project, you know, and the way he talked about it and where the thing was and what it's doing for the students. And we thought, we're going to come here and say we back them. But then we did some further research and we heard other things, and this was about as bad as putting what West Shore wanted to do, to put a boat dock and everything in front of the country club there, which would have been all noise and all noise. Fortunately, they did not do that. Now, another thing is, I guess these boat clubs like to make money by having regattas. They get all these various clubs, and they sell food and everything else. Now, Gary said they were not going to do that. We've had the West Shore Golf Course that said they're not going to do that, and a couple of years later, they go do that. We go to talk to them, and said, well, this board is not responsible for what a board before promised you. And so we don't know what they're going to do. Now, can you imagine a regatta with all these people yelling, screaming, blocking traffic, and where are they going to park all these trailers that are coming up? You can barely get a trailer down Ferry Road and West River now. Now, the last thing I'm concerned about, and we discussed this with Gary since we live on this. These drivers, particularly the golfers, early morning, when they're late for their tee time, actually come at 50, 60 miles an hour down West River. They come down Ferry Road, and there's no stop sign there. They come down and imagine the kids trying to carry a big skull across the road down with these drivers coming in, or even the kids from their safety, from being there, from attempting to get into the parking lot and so forth at the very early hours of the morning. I'm concerned about that for their safety. Now, as was mentioned before, if there is a location at Water's Edge where we seem to be building up a tremendously great recreation area and so forth, I think that would be a good alternative spot, which is much safer over there and is supervised and everything else. I have real concerns that the spot where they are suggesting there could be some disasters and some kids really hurt, and our neighbors are not going to be at all happy as soon as the first kid or the coxswain or the loudspeakers. I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts for 6 years. I watched the skulls from Harvard and MIT practicing in the morning because my graduate house was right on the Charles River Basin. And I'll tell you, it is loud. But as a student at the time, I didn't care. Now, as a senior citizen, I very much care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments? Yes.
Jim LaPointe, 9051 Lake Street. I also was an active parent in the rowing club for many years. Both my daughters went through the program, and both row and rowing in Michigan State University right now. As far as the comment on the noise, it's there now. All the rowers that row now row up and down the river all the time. It's right across from Elizabeth Park. You have noise from Elizabeth Park from all their concerts and stuff like that, and as far as the noise goes on that aspect. But just going off of every person that's rowing now rows from Wyandotte Boat Club down to that point and back, so it isn't anything that isn't going to be heard in there. But also going with the part of not enhancing the area and stuff like that, actually, I won't give any names, but there's 2 doctors that came into the community. And they told me over the years of being involved in the rowing, and I was in Wyandotte, and they're also involved in the Wyandotte Boat Club. First thing they said, they're coming in for residency, the first thing they wanted to find out is where can they row, because all of them rowed collegiately in college. And that brought them to Crozille and the surrounding area, because of the rowing facility that was available. And the only thing is that we don't have an option to offer anything other than the short period of time that we have to try to train our rowers to. We have numerous kids, and I can't count on 2 hands
how many kids have got collegiate scholarships through rowing, through the Grosley program, which gives all credit to our coaching staff and our, it has to do with respect, which all the kids do. We're asked to come back to places where we stay over since 2004 I've been involved, where they look forward to us to come because they've always said that all our kids are so respectful and so kind and they pick up after themselves. We stay after all these regattas and clean up after these regattas. And as far as going to the regatta part of it, the regattas these things are set in U.S. rowing. These things, it takes Wyandotte Boat Club has like 2, 3, 4 regattas throughout the season. You can't just say, I'm going to have a regatta. You technically can, but as far as being an actual all-out, downright regatta, it's just all basically training. And they do that now. They do it in the fall, they do it in the spring, and they do it in the summer. And they go all the way down to the Pay Bridge, or Free Bridge, and beyond sometimes, if possible, which is very rare. If anybody goes over the Free Bridge, and probably 75% of the time, if not more, there's no way that you'd even see kayakers south of that bridge. And then you're going to put kids in a very low waterline boats. They need to be north of the Free Bridge. And they have to be south of, well, I won't say the south or north of, can't go too much further. Wind down, when you start getting by, you start getting in rough water again. It's a very isolated spot that you have to be in to actually make it safe. And that is why they Wyandotte Boat Club built theirs there. And the only issue with us always wanting something here for our community is because it's our communities and the equipment that we have we utilize for our community. And saying safety, kids are going off the island right now. We're having problems recruiting kids because the parents won't allow them to go off the island, and it's not in the morning all the time. There's a very short period of time when they start doing that, and it's a lot of evening, and they got to coordinate a lot of different.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you short. Now I'm taking it that you're supporting the.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying I'm supporting the motion.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other? You want to make a brief back there? You want to come up? Make a comment brief.
Let me make a.
No, wait.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Ed Kostroff, 23215 West River. Just one other note. We may have the cart in front of the horse here because they are all saying that this is a high school sport and this is a high school program. As of today, this afternoon, the high school athletic director, the superintendent of the schools, and the president of the school board have no knowledge from the rowing club that they are trying to do this. And they have no approval from them yet. Hasn't been presented to them. And the school has a policy that says any of this has to come before the school board before it can be approved.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, you are talking about the high school rowing, aren't you?
I certainly am.
Yeah, right.
As far as comments about we didn't touch and broach upon the subject of whether it's an approved athletic endeavor for the high school. I'm not sure that it really makes a difference with our decision-making.
No.
Yeah, so with that, I think, unless you have anything else to add, I think we'll go into a deliberation here. Gary Ames?
Yes.
You want?
I just wanted to address a couple of things. I want to speak to the neighbors because we truly do want to be good neighbors and are concerned about mitigating any noise impact that will come from this. And it's very important to us to do whatever we can do to make this property work and to not disrupt the neighborhood. And what Mr. LaPointe said is true. Our coaches take it very seriously and build a sense of responsibility, and is one of the main things that we teach these kids, and we've always gotten favorable comments about all of our kids, and that's very important to us. Additionally, a couple other things I wanted to address. The most important thing to us is the safety to our kids. And I've spoken with the police chief about the precautions we could put into place to ensure that, not ensure is probably not the right word, but to make this as safe a crossing spot as possible. And additionally, we had looked at Water's Edge seriously, and that was one of the big concerns about Water's Edge. Is the nice thing about the West Shore property is while it is, you do have to cross a road, you've got a clear line of sight, and you can see what's coming down the road, and we would certainly put precautions into place, both inside of the rowing club or the rowing team, watching when others are crossing the road, as well as other safety precautions, which I talked to the police chief about. But at West Shore or at Water's Edge, you don't have that. You've got a hilly terrain, and a turn, you don't have that line of sight. And that was one of the issues that came up when we were looking at Water's Edge.
Did you actually ask West Shore about doing the rowing club there? Did you actually, I'm not West Shore, but Water's Edge, did you actually?
Yes, we discussed
did you actually,
we discussed it with Tim Roney
and their
Jim,
answer?
I can address that from the township point of view in a moment.
Okay, fine. You have anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay.
I will be brief. Eric Flusson again, and I think you put your finger on it. Most of these tangential comments are really addressed by the land use and site plan regulations. It's not, it does not affect whether or not this is a practical difficulty in terms of complying with the regulation or not. But I did want to, it was interesting on that note to say move it to Water's Edge. There's properties up there. So take whatever perception about noise problems and take it out of my neighborhood. That's not appropriate. It's still a gross ill. But I will support to you that the noise from the boats, and I hate to use the word noise, but we'll use that term since it's been thrown out there, is certainly nothing more than you'll hear from a gas golf cart. Right? So it's a consistent use, and that will be addressed with the appropriate township officials and boards, and I think we need to refocus on where we're going here with this ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, with that, we have any comments from the board? Uda?
Thank you. Sorry about the cough. The Township Board and the Recreation Commission had extensive conversations with the rowing club about different sighting possibilities, not just at Water's Edge, but all over the island. There was a search done at one point in the last 2 years to identify kayak sites, and the rowing club was always a part of the background of that search. We looked at township properties where there might be potential on Thoroughfare Canal as well as at Water's Edge. And there were always mitigating circumstances. A lot had to do with safety in the water or safety getting to the water where the kids would be rowing. I think Mr. Fleslin hit the nail on the head. This NIMBY follows an activity all over the place, not in my backyard. If we pursued that kind of a thinking with all our decisions, we'd never build another school. We would certainly not have football games, high school football games, where you can see the lights when you're crossing the bridge and you know there's a game going on Gray's Drive. These are community activities. West Shore is a viable golf and country club, but I know it's a struggling club and is looking for ways to enhance what it has to offer to golfers and its club members. One of the options that West Shore also has is to sell that parcel and go through the same process to develop it into a home. I think, and I guess in truth and fairness, I'm wearing an oar, so it's kind of clear my daughter is a rower, is a beneficiary of the rowing program. They're not financially in any way, but spiritually and motivationally, and along with Jim's daughters, she is at Michigan State University. The reason West Shore and the rowing club come together in such a nice nexus is that they enhance each other and their property uses work together to offer something along the same recreational lines. Without forcing West Shore, the variances will prevent West Shore from having to adversely change its own properties, and at the same time allowing another group to create a respectful joint recreational facility there. So I personally support their bid to go for these variances. I agree with Mr. Flesland that these other issues of noise and disruption and whatever people perceive might happen at a site like this are best addressed at the next level of review. And again, residents will have an opportunity to voice and raise their concerns. But in terms of providing West Shore a good use for its property and the rowing club an opportunity, I support giving these two variances.
Any other comments? I listened to you, Uda, and I see your point of view, but I have we're still up against the 30,000 square foot requirement, and that's separate from really the emotions that go into the rowing club activity. It's, and also I look at if we were to go ahead and say, well, you can go and purchase this property that's less than 30,000 square feet, what does that mean to the next applicant who wants to go and purchase a piece of property that's less than 30,000 square feet on an R1E overlay? We have to be cognizant of that fact, that there are some repercussions that go along with this approval. So with that,
But we also do say that we look at each case individually, and I think the distinction I draw is that we have two recreational activities wanting to share one property, and I think that does create a difference from somebody buying a property to build a home on it. That this is already a recreational facility, and this will allow the two groups to actually enhance what's available on a site. It's not just for the high school, it is for the community and for the good of the community. I think that gives it a different flavor than it would if they were looking to build a home and buy a lot that was smaller than the prescribed size.
Yes, Bob.
As far as the comments we've heard, from
Sorry.
from residents in the area, the noise seems to be an issue that can't be overlooked. The use of the property certainly seems like it would be a good match. But if property values fell as a result of doing this, we'd be better off putting a house there than a club that had the potential of having a lot of noise. That's my comment.
Thank you, Bob. I think we kind of closed the comments of the audience. I'm of the opinion that you still have to look at the 30,000 square feet as opposed to something less than that. I think, and property values, as Bob mentioned, the property values do mean a lot to the homeowners that are in that direct vicinity. So those are things that you have to take into account. We always take into account the concerns of the people that are in the surrounding area. That's why we send out the memos to the people. That's one of the reasons we do that. Are there any other comments?
Excuse me, yes. Number one, the group has done very long investigative procedures to find out what could happen to a rowing club. They have set up their bylaws, which is a copy of the guideline, and have made very strong bylaws for controlling the group. Their bylaws do not necessarily address the young rowers. It addresses rowing people. And so I think that with the research that they've done, and I know they've talked to the officers of the Planning Commission on different occasions, and we have cautioned them very strongly about the things in the neighborhood. And I think it's time that we recognize we need more recreational abilities. And no one likes change when it affects them. And I'm the same kind of person. I don't like change either. But I think it's time that we address we need the additional recreation.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I think I agree that this is a good thing for Grosse-Ile, and I am concerned about the noise, but it's more as my consideration would be overlooking that, because it's going to be good for Grosse-Ile, and quality of life in that whole area is not going to be disturbed that much, I don't think. So I would be in favor of this motion.
Okay, with that, I think we pretty well discussed it. Brian?
I just want to add one point, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if I was clear in my presentation. If the board is to consider approval, I would suggest that you incorporate a condition that the applicant must go through and obtain approval through the land division process as well. Since we're doing ZBA first, I want to make sure if you're going to approve it, that it's conditioned upon approval of the land division, which would be the next step if it's approved.
I'm sorry, I got the impression from your memo that that was a logical next step or necessitated, so...
Yes, that's correct. I just want to make sure the record's clean. I think it's cleaner if it's a condition of approval. That way, when they move forward, it can be presented as such.
It appears that the rowing club will be leasing the land between West River and the channel, right? They're going to lease that land. Is that for the rowers' use to get access to the water? So that's a lease situation there. Yeah.
And I think that's not included in what's before us.
Yeah, without that lease, then you can't go ahead because there will be no water, right? We have to have that was my comment. So we have the lease. The lease would be in place.
Yes. I can address it, Grant. Yes,
materials.
it's in the materials. There is the lease is in place, conditioned upon approval of the variances and all of the other subsequent steps. But once, hypothetically, everything is done and we have all of the approvals, then yes, the lease will the condition will be satisfied and the lease will go into effect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, can we get a motion?
Well, I'll need a little bit of official language help, but I would like to move that the ZBA approve see, not only do I fall out of my chair, my goodness. There we go. Thank you. That the ZBA approve appeal number 12-005 to allow a reduction in lot area for a future lot split and a 10-foot setback from the existing parking lot on lots 3 and 4, Gulfview Estates subdivision, as recorded in Wayne County Records, Township of Grosse Ile, County of Wayne, Michigan, with the, oh my gosh, what was that word? The condition on the future approval or pursuit and approval of a land division with Planning Commission review and recommendation to the Township Board, and a special land use and site plan review process, again with the Planning Commission and recommendation to the Township Board.
A second.
We have comments. My comment, what about the second variance?
That was
the parking lot.
the 10-foot.
The 10-foot parking lot.
That was part of the motion.
That was part. I missed that. So it was part of it. Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Mr. Chair, could I just suggest that that the motion maker incorporate some reference to the dimensional variance criteria?
Yes. Such as?
Such as the basis for your motion to approve?
Okay.
As in?
Is that added to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Help me.
That's okay.
Okay, so we want to read the motion again, Uda.
Well, can we have Lori read it back? just.
Did you get it, Lori?
I got most of it.
Okay. Read it.
To allow reduction in the 10-foot setback with conditions upon the future land division approval by the Planning Commission and a special land use and site plan approval from the Planning Commission and Township Board approval. And I'm not sure of the dimensional one.
Oh, I think what you want us to add is to permit the creation of a 26,932 square foot lot where a minimum of 30,000 square feet is required, and to permit an existing parking lot to abut the newly created parcel where a 10-foot setback is required.
Did you get that, Lori?
Sure.
Okay. Has the board digested that?
Oi. Is that allowed?
All those in favor?
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays? Hearing no nays? Oh, there's one nay. We have one nay. Okay. With that, the approval passed, so they can go forward. With
On to the next hurdle.
Thank you.
Can I just say,
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute relief here. We have to have a relief at the board, so we'll be back in 10 minutes.